Good morning, afternoon, good evening to everyone. We'll be starting in just a moment. Let a few more people wander in, but thanks for joining us. What do you think, team? We ready? Everyone accounted for? Okay. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is KS&R's webinar around Amplify. That is a group we put together internally to sort of push our AI agenda and experiment. And we're going to be spending some time talking about that journey as well as what we're seeing from our clients. We have several individuals on the call here that have very different perspectives and experiences with AI, both from a basic starting point to more advanced pushing the envelope on generative AI. So again, your comments and feedback is welcome. You are all muted, but we do have a Q&A section where you can type comments, share experiences. We're looking to be as collaborative as possible, short of you speaking, obviously, and we'll answer any questions that we see in the Q&A section throughout the conversation. Before we start, again, thank you for joining us. Hope everyone's doing well and safe, particularly in the Southeast. I know we have a couple staff members in Florida trying to weather some storms over the last few weeks. So again, thanks for making the time, particularly if you're put into one of those situations. And we have a great panel, like I said, to talk through these issues, and we'd like to introduce them now for just a moment. Kathleen, you want to start and say a few words about yourself and your experiences in this space?
Sure. My name's Kathleen McKnight, and I am a VP and principal here at KS&R, and I lead our technology practice. And because of that, I've had a lot of experience with AI over the past several years doing research on the topic of AI and seeing the evolution of AI uses, but also been participating in a lot of the experiments we're doing internally and using AI for our own business.
Great. Tricia.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tricia Houston. I lead our discovery and design practice here at KS&R, focus on experiences and innovation. So AI really fits into my world more from the qualitative side. So figuring out different ways to do analysis on unstructured data at scale, and also how we can use it on the front end of our work.
Great. And Ben.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Cortese, Vice President of Decision Sciences and Innovation, which is our end-to-end quantitative research department. I'm also the lead of the AI task force here at KS&R and the Amplify initiative. I've been doing a lot of the legwork when it comes to exploration and implementation of AI tools and applications across the organization, not only from a statistical standpoint and coding standpoint, but also just from a broad efficiency perspective, trying to uncover how AI can really help us get to better insights in the market research industry.
Great. And I'm Mike Nash. I lead our business services team, which really focuses on a lot of consulting firm clients, insurance, financial services. And we've seen the full range of the bad parts of AI and the good parts of AI. And most of my experiences are around things in thought leadership, building brand eminence, and that kind of lens. Let's start with a little bit about kind of KS&R's overall perspective, team. When we think about AI, our guiding principle or our North Star is really thinking about the human element. AI we look at as really another tool, right? It is never the finish line or the end product. It is an input to our conversations. And I think we've seen some experiences where that's really worked well. And I think we want to start with the positive side of that equation and maybe give us the crowd each a little bit of an experience of some positive things where you've seen AI really hit the home run, so to speak. Kathleen, you want to start a little bit and tell us about some of your success stories using AI?
Sure. A couple of the places it's been particularly helpful is just using AI to look at documents like transcripts from IDIs to get a quick summary overview of some of the key topics that were hit in an individual transcript. Another way that AI has been helpful in sort of day-to-day work is, using it in a brainstorming sense, ideation for different survey questions. Say I want to create a list of challenges or something like that. It's really gives you a good starting point rather than have to start from scratch.
How about you, Ben? You've seen a number of things on the more technical side as well. What are you hearing or seeing that's working in this space?
Yeah, I think that that's been something where we've had the team have a lot of success when it comes to writing code. So we do a lot of different code across um, several different platforms, and anytime that there is language involved, these models have really helped us not only become more efficient with how we write code, but also write code quicker. The co-pilots that are integrated with a lot of these platforms are super helpful and useful. Also going back and forth between the typical chatbots that you all think of when you think of generative AI, helping to initialize that problem solving when it comes to writing code. If you have a tough logic puzzle, for example, to solve, it can be really hard to sit down with a blank page and start to figure out how to tackle that. But having AI do the first draft, even from a technical perspective, has been a great way to kickstart our tough projects. Even going as far as spinning up prototypes to help us investigate different things and see if it's worthwhile to take it to that next step. And primarily for my individual use, and what I've been recommending folks that are newer to AI is to really try and start using AI as a replacement for web search. And so, historically, going to Google and typing in whatever you're looking for and scanning through individual websites to unpack and summarize information is a pretty cumbersome task. But Gen AI models these days are connected to the internet. And so they can actually go in and do that summarization for you and provide references about where the information came from so that you don't have to do that work. And from a technical standpoint, it's also helped eliminate the need for things like Stack Overflow and those other technical groups in combing through code and things that worked and things that didn't, and ultimately help us build out those solutions faster. So this does actually pose kind of a risk to SEO in the traditional sense, but I will say that at least for now, I believe it's pretty safe because the referencing that Gen AI models bring is not always correct. I would often say that it tends to be even more incorrect when it comes to referencing URLs. So you go and say, hey, give me the link for where this information came from, and ultimately you click it, it doesn't work. So fact checking is still one of those pieces that will, I think, preserve SEO for now.
Yep. And Tricia, from the qualitative standpoint, where are you seeing successes from an AI utilization?
Yeah, so building on what Kathleen said earlier, I mean, transcripts are definitely the starting point. So I think that's where probably most of us in the qual space were like, yes, we can take all these things and get there quicker. I think where the team has really been digging in is, okay, how can we use this there's always kind of like a limited amount of time, right, that you can do qual analysis. This isn't so much like saying it'll speed us up. I do think we'll get there, but you only have a couple weeks to do analysis because of it. You have to move on to the next thing. So the AI has allowed us to go deeper in the analysis because it's doing the upfront stuff faster. Being able to really kind of search for themes or even pull those quotes that can be cited, which is great, Ben, to your point, since it's not just pulling from general internet, it's pulling from a closed data set. It can give you those really good sources faster, just eliminating some of that manual labor that usually goes into the qualitative side of things.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. We've done some side-by-sides and kind of some A/B tests, particularly on that qualitative transcript notion, and we've really knocked down weeks and multiple days down to hours. Right now, again, there is a cadence and an iteration process that you have to get comfortable with and used to, and I think that's one of the key kind of pro tips in this, right? It's not one request and then you have your answer, right? It's a lot of back and forth and iterating with the platform to make sure you're getting the best answer. But we've definitely seen a drastic reduction in person hours when you think about 10, 20, 50 transcripts, trying to get a summarization or even, like you said, some quotes pulled. It's down to minutes and maybe hours at the most, right? So I think that's been a real eye opener for us from a time saving standpoint for sure. Of course, we can't have this conversation without talking about some of the downsides or even maybe just the cautions to be looking for, particularly if maybe you're newer to this conversation and haven't quite experienced some of the fatal flaws within the AI space. Kathleen, you want to talk about maybe some
Sure.
concerns?
I'll build off of some of what you and Tricia were talking about from a positive. I've seen the negative side of that too. So, there are hallucinations still out there. And even when I give a very specific prompt, when I'm referring to a specific document or specific set of documents and ask the AI to, I'm looking for a quote from a theme, looking at these documents or pointing to specific documents. The AI really wants to comply with your prompt or request. So even when a quote does not exist, it will send me sometimes a quote that it thinks would be there. And then so I really have to do the work to go back and do the verification and find that quote to be sure that that is actually a quote that was said in an interview that we did. So while it does shortcut the timeline, there's also still this human element of making sure that what we are getting back actually is what happened.
And Kathleen, we've seen the
that-
same thing when it comes to coding. It'll just create functions that don't exist because you asked it for it, and ultimately you go and you try it out in the code, and the package you're using is wondering what happened. What is this? It's not a thing that's real. So it's
Right.
definitely on both sides, not just the qual place. We see that in the coding space as well.
Yeah,
Right.
AI is like one of my kids, like the ultimate people pleaser, right? They're going to give you an answer, right? It might not be the right answer or a good answer, but you're going to get what you asked for. You get something that you asked for, right? Go
Yeah.
ahead, Kathleen. You were going to say something else.
No, I mean, I think so. It brings into this fact that like a lot of efficiency can be created, but we really have to be careful in checking and bringing the human element to make sure that, what we bring out of AI is accurate and is what we take forward has also been verified by humans as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think
Great.
that's
Go ahead, Trisha.
I think because I'm just going to build on what Kathleen just said, like to your point, there's still this verification where I'm seeing progress, or at least my team kind of showed me some progress, is in the context setting of how you ask for prompts or how you tell it to think about the transcripts, which that's a whole new skill set, right? Because to your point, Mike, if you ask your kids to do something, they're going to do exactly what you said. They're not going to put the judgment in there and think through it. We've probably all seen that video of the dad being told by his kids how to make the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and it takes many, many attempts to actually get it made because the kids can't even describe all the steps correctly. So that's also, if you want to try it for yourself, it's really apparent if you go try to make AI make an image. You don't realize how literal it will take you until you just get it to try to describe something or create something visual for you. It can be eye-opening.
Yeah, and one of our ongoing efforts, again, our experimentation's been over the last 18 months or so, is really creating these playbooks and these prompt recipes, right? So that we're not reinventing some of this stuff over and over again, right? So we do have some guideposts for individuals that, this is what you're likely to have to go through to experience. And it's not the same every time, obviously, but at least we give some people some direction to go through that iterative back and forth to make sure we're getting closer and closer, as well as some of the safeguards and guidelines about checking this work to minimize that hallucination, or at least not push that forward. Ben, you had a couple other ones where you've seen some things that we still need some advancements within this AI setting.
Well, and I think just continuing on with what everyone's been saying about how do we get what we're actually looking for out of these models. That's the key piece that I think everyone is still working towards. And there are three key components that go into that, right? There's what Trisha was talking about when it comes to that context setting and system message and what is the AI supposed to ground itself in. Then there's what types of output are you looking for? And if you're not very specific or provide actual examples, you could ask the same series of prompts 5 times and get 5 totally differently formatted random responses that don't quite meet your needs. And then the last piece is the training data. And so this is something that has been pretty eye-opening to our team, has been going in with out-of-the-box models and just trying to ask AI even with some context setting to perform a specific task that is for a niche product or service or a target group that is not well represented in the broad training data for these models. And the results, to Kathleen's point, they'll give you something, but it's not necessarily something that you want. And it will have the most confidence in its response out of anything that you ever spoken to before. And so you have to be really careful with how we think about training these models as well. And even a little bit of training data can go a long way. And so when I talk about training data, what is that? It's really hard to pin down. And that's one of the challenges we've seen, because in order to train your models to do what you want them to do, you need to provide context. And so ultimately, that's where a lot of what our research internally has been focused on, is how do we train these models using the right data to give us the right outcome? Still not there yet, but working towards that as a goal to help fill in that third component of these AI models, helping to make them stronger. I think it's really apparent when you think about translations in language. All of these models are really based in Western society, and so they're trained on the Romance languages, English primarily. And so if we're looking at translations to get by when you're traveling, sure, they'll be okay. People can generally understand, even if the translation isn't perfect, what you're trying to get out of it. But when you're talking about market research, and you're looking to translate a survey on the fly or have some sort of language translation that's not monitored by a human, we've seen things from just completely wrong translations all the way through just inconsistencies, right? And so you have some AI translations that don't align with the rest of your questionnaire, and then that throws respondents off, and you're not sure if your data is because of the questions you were asking or because the translation wasn't quite right, all because the AI didn't quite meet the mark when it comes to those pieces. And so, we've really seen that adding in additional information as much as you can be helpful, but it still, again, requires that human touch to know what to add in, how to ask it, so that you can get the right results.
Yeah, the other reason why we look at this human element and talk so much about AI being a guide or an assistant, co-pilot's a familiar phrase that people have been marketing. The ability to search out nuance and really give recommendations or guidance based on those summaries or based on that translation is still quite a ways behind. So we still feel comfortable that we have a career and a future in market research, and that AI is not going to be the push button answer for everything, because you really can't get that recommendation and sort of strategic view of the data. But we do enjoy sort of short cycling that grunt work side of market research in a way that gets us a little bit faster to that better answer. The efficiency has been a big part, and right, a lot of our examples we've talked about have been around efficiency, and that seems to be the easiest way to see value. But our goal is really trying to, again, get to that better answer and a more valuable answer. And I think that's going to still take some transformation. We have seen some early successes getting closer and closer to that. But Ben, maybe why don't you start with a few of these, I don't know, game changers, if you will, that we see as really not just saving time and money, which helps, but really making a better response or a better respondent from an AI assistance perspective.
Sure. So, one of the biggest things that we've started to implement has been AI augmented open ends. So you think about a quant study that has 3 or 4 open ends in it. You can ask your question and get some insights out of it, but engagement is not always where you want it to be when it comes to open-ended questions. And so, ultimately, what we've been implementing is an AI agent that is embedded in some of these open ends that asks a follow-up question that's relevant to whatever the respondent had answered. And so not only that, but we've been able to train these responses to follow certain targets that hit on whatever the research objectives are. And so ultimately, we can pivot the conversation in real time, or we can ask for a deeper, more detailed answer from the respondent based on whatever they said first, without the need for a real-time moderator. And that's helped us get a lot more rich information, nearly doubling the character counts in these open ends, and ultimately being able to paint a bigger picture across a couple different elements of whatever we're trying to research when it comes to these types of open ends. Now, just a quick caveat with these, it is a second open end, so it does consume additional time in the study, and it can be a little bit frustrating for respondents because they don't necessarily expect it, and once it happens, they don't know when it's going to end, because it's an AI generated conversation, so it feels real. But it's one of those things that's really helping us start to blend between traditional IDIs and moderated interviews and traditional quantitative research, helping to get some of that more qualitative second and third sentence around why our respondents are answering the way they are. But it does then lend itself to a whole lot of extra data. And analyzing open-ended data is something that has always been a cumbersome task. Even if you just have a couple hundred, it can be tricky to find a way to view the entire set of information without any bias, right? Because as you're going through, you're reading the first, 10, 20, 30, starting to paint the picture of what's in there. And ultimately, you might miss something once you get to the 110th open end and not realize that you've just kind of baked it into a different code or a different theme without realizing it. And so we're also using AI to look at the entire set of responses and help us build out codes and analyses through that lens, ultimately taking in all of the information at once, eliminating a lot of that bias and giving us a better picture of what the open-ends and respondents are actually trying to tell us. And furthermore, taking that and feeding it through more of a predictive model to help us quantify, in the cases when we have a lot of these open ends, how much of the respondent base actually aligns with that theme or those themes, and doing this rather quickly. And so ultimately, to Mike's point about speed, this is one of those pieces that, as this type of solution becomes more reliable and more trusted by the community, it's really going to help us get a lot more value out of those open ends that may have just sat on the shelf prior.
Yep. Yeah, I think many of us on this call began our research careers coding open ends, and how exciting would that be if that sort of went away to a different function and it was not quite as necessary anymore. Trisha, you were going to talk about a few things with fraud, and again, that's a big part of how we're dealing with or using AI. But tell us about some of your fraud experiences and ways to benefit from AI.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a double-edged sword of an area, you and I have talked about. I think to me, this is really important because I'm a huge advocate for respondent experience. I might do a lot of qualitative. My background also has quant, still see a lot of quant. And I believe that the better experience we can provide for our respondents, and we're going to get better data. So if we can use AI to predict fraud, which is certainly possible, and folks like Rep Data and all the different panels are doing some great stuff in that space, but they'll also warn that AI is creating fraud. Especially in your open-ended space, Ben, maybe you're using an open end as a kind of attention check, or even like in your screener to catch folks. Well, now you got to check and make sure that doesn't look like a chat GPT response, right? Or even in like self-administered online qual. So it kind of goes both ways. And I think the other area, going back to the qualitative side of things, where I see a lot of discussion is in platforms. So we're kind of talking about, y'all are familiar with ChatGPT or Copilot, kind of like the open, more general ones. There's also like, say, qual specific tools or quant specific tools. And I was at the Atlanta Wire event last week and just had a roundtable discussion with a bunch of moderators, and it's like trying to find the one tool to rule them all. And it's a new one every 3 to 4 months. So
Right.
I think that's something that will always kind of be transforming. And I think we just have to look at this as kind of a moving target in terms of how it will best be able to serve us. I don't think we'll ever have the best. It will continue to evolve.
Yeah, we're on our second or third platform, again, in a short 12, 18-month window. And I know there's a question in the chat. We'll get to some specifics and talk for a minute about that. So hang tight. But you're right. It's a constant evolution and experiment, which, again, I think researchers are in a particularly positive place to go down that path and journey. One of the things we've done, you mentioned the duality of AI and the degree that it's a hindrance and a fraud producer, right? That the bad guys are out there using AI to sort of manipulate surveys and do the wrong things that are not helpful to us. Likewise, we're using it to minimize that, right? And we've got some fresh data, and there's some papers that'll be coming out on sort of where that duality sits. But Kathleen, you've written some stuff and done some things around trust, which I think is a big word when you talk about AI. What are some of your experiences or reflections on this kind of trust notion and where that might cross the chasm at some point?
I mean, I think we've seen from a B2B and a B2C perspective that, we just talked about some reasons why maybe you shouldn't trust AI and some reasons why you should really be excited about AI. And I think we see both of those cool hearts, having some concerns and some trust issues around AI. And I think, as we work with our respondents and we work with our clients, right, we need to do some things to, continue to build up trust in things that come out of AI. And because of that, we have like a huge set of guardrails in place for how we are implementing AI, and, what we do, what we're making sure takes place, in AI use in our company. I don't know, Trisha, do you want to talk about some of the sort of guardrails that are in place, when we think about AI?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of things. I'll actually pass it over to Ben too. But when I was trying to learn about this really early, I think the biggest aha with this idea of, having like a walled garden and, having your own instance and how you're training things, and that's a very different situation than an open model. And this goes back to the importance of what is that training data that Ben was talking about. I'm most excited to see what we can do with data sets that we know what they are and what we can actually extract from them as we add to them in the research space, right? Think about what all we have at our fingertips. And that also helps with privacy and security, which obviously is a huge concern since we're doing things that are proprietary and don't need to be shared publicly. And Ben, I know you were sharing some stuff about costs too, like as we do some of these analysis at scale, does it get more expensive or is it just kind of flat?
That's a great question. And so I think that when you're considering the choice of the different tools to use, we have available the license model where it's 25 or 30 bucks a month for your employees to join one of the traditional like chat bots like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or some of those other ones. And ultimately, that gives you this sandbox that's a one-size-fits-all tool. And so, but it's very manual. So there, you can't really build a lot of automation in terms of the way that those chatbot features work because it's just conversational. So it's great for, ideation, writing documents, etc. But if you're trying to, do the automated open-end coding that we were discussing earlier, that would be a very cumbersome process to do through those solutions. So there's another solution which is ultimately through the APIs, where you run API calls through automated workflows, and those can get very expensive very quickly. They tend to be based on token counts, which is a complicated formula taking the number of characters and mapping it to how much data is shared across through the API that the AI agent has to consume. But ultimately, it's thinking about the volume. And so when you're talking about these sort of workflows where you're sending API calls back and forth, those can get in the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars very quickly if you're not careful about how you set those things up. So cost is certainly a consideration depending on what you're trying to do and what models you're using. The older models are cheaper but not as good. The newer models are pretty expensive and a little bit slower. So there's all sorts of different trade-offs to consider as well when thinking about how you want to tackle the specific challenge. And making sure you make that right choice is going to drive the success or failure of your AI initiative, because if you don't make the right choice, either it will take too long or you won't get the outputs that you're looking for.
The
And I
other
guess
one that
back
we
to the
go ahead,
point, I
Catherine.
guess, some people have some questions about like what tools are we using? We are constantly evaluating all the tools that are out there and re-looking at what we should be trying next. So there's not like an end solution. There's not like, hey, we've solved the problem. We've gotten to the end goal. It's constantly, evaluating all the tools that are there and seeing, hey, we trying this out. Is there something else that can do even better than what we've been able to achieve so far in a secure manner?
Yeah, that's the key, the security and the isolation, right? Because not only do we not want any of our KS&R prompts out there in the ether, we don't want individual client data anywhere out there or commingled with other client data, right? So we're constantly setting up separate sandboxes to make sure things are isolated in that way. The other concern, I know we're running out of time, but it's the whole culture notion, right? Back to even just the simple example of coding open end. I don't know what market research looks like if there's a whole generation of people that have never hand coded 1,000 completes, right? As painful as that event is, there is a learning process through that and a kind of a growing process through that. And I don't know what happens if that just goes away at some point, right? So I think those are all concerns that we think about. Same thing with writing a survey, right? If they get to a point where we can press a button and have a survey pop up, does that change what market research is about and the types of people that are in the market research industry? So I think those are things that still we don't have answers on, but we do think about as a leadership group to think about how we're implementing and where we're implementing AI tools. Ben, you want to wrap us up with just a little bit of KS&R's guiding principles and sort of kind of again North Star of what we think about here?
Sure. So when we think about how we've been approaching AI here at KS&R, ultimately we have stressed this a lot in this conversation that we really do take a human-centric approach. Ultimately, AI is only as good as the human behind the AI, and AI is an assistant to our team members, helping solve business challenges, not leading the way. That's really helped us bake in a lot of the guardrails and guidelines that we have when it comes to responsible and ethical use of AI. We also value security. As we've discussed, we have individual sandboxes for all of our client engagements, as well as all of our research on research, making sure that even under the hood, we are keeping all of that data safe and secure and correctly segregated as it should be. And ultimately, we're doing all of this so that we can continue to advance our own understanding and usage of AI to improve our processes, workflows, and ultimately share that back to the community as we continue our research on research and engagement in conferences and thought leadership pieces, helping everyone learn together about how we're using and learning from AI. And so with that, we'll open up to Q&A from the audience. If you have any questions, as a reminder, you can submit questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen.
There is a question here, and I'll toss it over to Ben, or I can start to answer it. Do you envision having an enterprise in-house AI platform for KS&R to work across all client studies, qual, quant, IDIs, multivariate? So I think we don't envision it working across all studies, in that just what Ben just spoke about is that we want to keep different clients' data segregated, so we can't work across all of our studies. But I think there is some potential. So if we had a particular client that wanted to look across multiple studies, that we could envision that in the future. But Ben, tell me if you disagree.
Yeah, I really think the way that we think about building solutions for our clients and for the community in general is in building specific ChatGPT agents to do specific tasks that ultimately we can take and have canned solutions where we can upload the training data that we found to work the best. And that way it keeps our individual client information secure and safe, but it's still that same solution. So everyone can benefit from the solutions that we build out and have those models trained on relevant data without sacrificing, the ethical considerations around whose data goes where.
And I would just add one thing to that. I do think there's a big opportunity in the industry for what we just described. I agree with Kathleen and Ben. I actually don't think that would probably be housed at a supplier, but I think maybe, a technology enabler to really help democratize and utilize some of that data on the client side that might be sitting on the shelf. I know we've seen some of the limitations of those platforms in the past, but I do think generative AI deployed correctly within an organization could be a big unlock for what exists.
Yeah. And I'll start one again, another question from the crowd. So thank you for your participation. But the idea of using AI to minimize fraud or highlight fraud. And from a respondent perspective, I think we talked a little bit about our chat bot tool, right? So again, we'll start engaging if we see a less than responsive open end. We probe them and prompt them for more. If we see a strange open end, we probe them and prompt them for more. And that lets us make sure that that person is not either asleep at the wheel and or a real human giving legitimate answers. The other thing we see a lot, and where we try to sort of look at AI as a way just to look for patterns, right? And we can search patterns, everything from consistency of answers. We can look for everything from time elements and timestamps within certain sections of surveys, and just do that now at scale, as opposed to traditionally a human looking at an Excel spreadsheet trying to figure out what kind of limits or bounds there might be. AI is becoming a much more efficient way to garner those rails and guide rails and say, hey, this person looks out of bounds for some reason, right? So I think
it can help us identify those patterns, right?
Yeah.
And even further, right, when it comes to the open ends, the AI that we're using actually has a score that's assigned to every open end that measures both coherency and relevance. And so that score actually helps us determine on the fly low quality respondents if they don't meet a certain threshold of that score.
I think we're handled. Give it just one more minute. Thank you all for hanging with us. I've got one here. What's this person saying? Give me a minute. Best experiments. What's the best way to experiment or get involved with AI with an AI experimental design? Ben or Kathleen or Tricia, anything to help people think about where to start if they're just kind of starting down this journey?
So yeah, I think when we do any of our trainings for folks that haven't used AI before, it's easiest to start with those chatbots, and instead of the API calls and things like that, it's a lot less technical and is also more conversational. And I've just been saying, hey, treat this as though you're going to do a web search. You want to learn something? Try it on the AI first, and that helps you figure out how to ask the right questions, how to create different prompts and follow-ups, and ultimately learn the limits from what the AI can do versus what it can't do. Anybody else have other ways where you all learn how to start using AI?
For me, it's always been again testing the results, right? Stress testing those results. It's fun to put a prompt in and get a result in seconds. But then you got to do the legwork and just go back and say, does this really make sense, right? Is this really a real thing? And that's where, again, the human element is so important, that we cannot just get lazy or find ourselves relying on AI to a too great extent, right? But I think almost any experiment is worthwhile. And I think our goal going forward is really trying to get to that prediction point, right? Where it's more than just a time saver or an efficiency saver. It's really starting to predict some answers that maybe we wouldn't have thought about on our own. And I think that's the exciting part, that maybe we'll be back here in a year or 6 months and be able to sort of talk about ways that we looked at AI with segmentation projects and other things like that to start predicting activity, as opposed to just more quickly getting through what we see in our traditional methods.
Right. That's a hope for the future, right? How could AI help us uncover the nuance that we're not seeing as humans, right? Because it has so much capacity there. So that's a hope for the future as well.
Yep. Yep.
I think sometimes it's been helpful for me to step back and say, okay, while we're talking about this in the context of research, we're all business people. So to just get started, like, how can this help me in my day-to-day business tasks or life tasks, just to almost get in the habit. I remember when we started with the platform here, the sandbox platform here at KS&R, I was sharing with Ben, I was like, I just forget to use it. It's like, it's just habitual to do things the other way. So I had to like put it on my browser bar, have it there to click, and start using it for things outside of projects to really just build the muscle memory, to even remember to use the tools that are available and have fun with it too. That'll make it stick sometimes in your mind.
Yep. Yep. And we did set a team aside specifically dedicated to this activity, right? So it'd be good, depending on the size of your company, to tag a few individuals and clear out a portion of their day or their week to really engage. Because again, it's not something you could just dip your toe into, right? You've got to go pretty deep. Don't have to go whole company deep, but those people that are engaged in it really need to experiment and look for the flaws. And there's a question about bias, right? Look for the biases, right? So I think all data has biases. Again, that's where I think we win in this argument from a researcher perspective. We've known that for years. No matter what approach, what technique, what market you're in, there are biases. So I think we're naturally attuned to sort of search some of those out. And I think Ben mentioned one earlier about the fact that these are basically Western tools, right? So when you go over into Asia, it's a tougher use case, and you just got to be careful and look at the results and make a judgment. But we don't have any sort of specific bias blocker, because I think everything's going to have some bias with it, and you just got to be careful and again put that human element on top of the AI output to make sure you're not going down a bad path.
Well, as we've been building out some of these more canned solutions, right, like thinking about the transcript evaluator or the open-end analyzer, those kinds of things, we've always had a initial rigorous research on research step internally that we do to make sure that whatever we're building is doing what we expect it to do, so that we can, tune the system message, and we can make sure that the training data and the examples we provide are relevant and there's enough of them to give us what we're trying to accomplish. So we don't just go in blind and use these things and build out these solutions without testing them. And ultimately, we have punted on a couple of them because they haven't worked, and we've just relied on traditional techniques. And others where it's been really effective, we've been able to double down into, all right, how can we, tune this and make this even stronger to give us better results faster?
Yep, agree. Anything else we're missing? I think we've caught up on most of the questions. Team,
There
any
was
other thought? Go ahead.
a
Go ahead.
question, somebody was asking if the recording was going to be available.
Sure.
Yeah, the recording should hit your inbox an hour after we close the webinar. And if you're interested in a link to share with other colleagues, reach out to us. We're happy to provide that as well.
Yep. Yep.
I like this one, so I want to, maybe this is a good
Okay.
one to close on. But it's
Sure.
what AI has changed your life the most?
Okay, Ben, you liked it so much, you got an answer?
For me, ultimately, it's been those co-pilots. And so
Okay.
they're embedded into the platforms that we're using to write code. And it's like super autocomplete. So ultimately, I'll start writing something. And instead of having to type it all out, think through all the details and nuances of semicolons, brackets, etc., it just completes it for me. And that's been something that has really increased the efficiency, from a stats perspective, and thinking through how do we make sure that the code is correct. Well, now we become editors instead of writers. And that's been a really strong thing that's just helped a lot in my day-to-day.
I
I
think
would
mine,
say
I go
for,
back. Oh, go ahead, Kathleen. Go ahead.
for me, it's using it as a thought starter. So sometimes like you're writing a survey or a discussion guide and not, you're staring at a blank page. I know we talked about objectives, but how can you, get past that blank page, and using it as a thought starter and then putting your own, judgment on it, but using it as a thought starter really saves time.
Yeah. For me, I'll go back to the qualitative stuff. And again, I remember staying up nights looking for a quote. And it's in there. You did 30 IDIs, and this person said this someplace. You can't find it. I've loved being able to go back in and type, find that quote on pricing of that was complaining about a price of something, right? And boom, there it is, right? So I think that's been my biggest saving of time and frustration, just not having to dig through, especially when it's in that data set someplace. You just can't put your finger on it. That's always been good.
Yeah, and definitely agree with the transcript comments. And I think similar to what Ben said, I love it when it's in line of the work that I'm already doing or the personal things I'm already doing. I'm trying out a journaling app called Reflection, where it will do like AI prompts based on what you type each day. And then it will AI analyze across months or in the past year to look for patterns and prompt you with different things, which that's a personal journaling purpose, but think about what that could be for like mobile ethnography or longitudinal studies. I think that could be a really neat application.
Yeah, the world is changing for sure. And again, hopefully this gives people some ideas or some thoughts on how to get involved and get into it. We certainly don't pretend to have all the answers, but we are playing with this pretty intensely. And again, as the rest of you have other experiences, feel free to share them. Give us a call, drop a line, and we'd love to talk about this stuff. I think that's going to conclude our session. We thank you all for hanging in there. I do have some of my friends down in Florida. Hope you're all safe and well, but hang in there, guys, if you've been hit by that storm. And enjoy the rest of your week. And thank you again. Talk soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.